that mic talk. I just wanted to touch it. Yeah. Oh. All right. Always wear closed-toed shoes. You could pick up a disease off this floor that you might never get rid of. And never let any of them stand behind you. And that's how I began my adventure with the men of a maximum security ward of a forensic mental hospital, which means everyone there has committed a crime. Serious crimes like rape and murder. The fact that they committed a crime is not in question, but they have all been found by a judge or a jury to be not guilty by reason of insanity. My parents were thrilled. I don't know why I instantly gravitated towards this volunteer group. Morbid curiosity, desire to be different, to have a hobby that would shock others. But this was a college volunteer group in the mid-2000s in Washington, D.C. A small group of us visited 2 maximum security wards on Friday afternoons for a couple of hours. The group was started by a girl just a few years older than me, and she had a summer internship for her psychology major at the hospital and saw how bleak things were on the criminal side. So she started this outreach group for us to play board games with the guys. This federally run facility had been around since the Civil War. It was disgusting and dilapidated and frequently under scrutiny for health and safety violations. Like the time they casually asked if we were by chance vaccinated for rabies because the hospital was infested with bats.
Yeah.
Before this experience, I didn't realize that not guilty by reason of insanity got you a longer sentence than guilty would have. Longer because these guys didn't have an actual sentence. Their sentence was until they got better. So many of them had been in there for 20 or 30 years already, with no end in sight. Most likely, they were going to live out their lives here, and we were the only visitors for any of them. I came into this with a naive notion that people might game the system to get a luxurious stay at a mental hospital, but instead of a rough stay in jail. One look at this place and I knew how wrong I was. I was just a teenager when I started going, but as I began to bond with these guys, I started taking my responsibility as their only visitor very seriously. I made myself go every week, even when I was hungover or it was snowing or I wanted to do anything besides sit on a plastic-covered couch and play Jenga. At first, it was strictly board games. But soon, I found myself being pulled aside for one-on-one talks. They wanted to tell me about abuse in their childhoods, about serving in Vietnam, and all the side effects they had from Agent Orange, about the families they had outside these walls that hadn't seen them in decades. We weren't supposed to talk about their crimes, but sometimes they did. They showed me Bible and Quran verses they found relatable and asked me if I thought God could forgive them. One of those guys was Andy. Unlike most of the guys who had been there for decades, he arrived during the 4 years I volunteered there. He was the youngest guy in there by far. He was in his 20s, only a couple of years older than us, and he was more enthusiastic about our visits than anyone else. His game of choice was Scrabble. He claimed he read the dictionary all week in preparation, and he usually had the board set up before we even arrived. He loved to gloat, especially when he beat the college kids at Scrabble. One Friday, his face was black and blue, and his nose and eyes were so swollen we could hardly tell it was him. They'd been adjusting the dosage on his medication, he said, and it gorked him out so badly that he face planted into the floor. The hospital didn't even bother to fix his now broken nose. But even with a busted face, Andy was a charmer and a flirt. He often told me I was the best part of his week, though it didn't seem like I had much competition. For the record, I doubt that I'm anyone's best part of their week, so I still carry that compliment with me very close to my heart. In a very original Valentine's Day art project, he once compared the way our visits make him feel inside to warm pea soup and hot buttered rolls. We all felt a fondness towards Andy, and we related to him. Maybe he didn't know the rules because he was new, or maybe he didn't care. But he told us his first, middle, and last name. And the temptation was too great. We Googled him, and we immediately regretted it. The article said that Andy killed a man who he thought was coming on to him. He dismembered the body and stuffed all the pieces in a duffel bag in the guy's closet. And they found the victim weeks later when they were evicting him for failing to pay the rent. And of course, this changed how I saw him. I mean, I couldn't help it, right? I was more guarded, a little nervous and jumpy. And then it hit me that all of these guys probably had a news article just like this one. And I felt really dumb for not thinking about that sooner. I went through mental gymnastics about our visits, right? They committed these crimes. They were real victims and real grieving families. And they were also very seriously mentally ill. And they were serving sentences without expiration dates in a hospital that was failing at almost every metric. Is it even possible for them to get better in a place like this? They had no one else to visit them and nothing else to look forward to. I mean, maybe we could all just play games on a Friday afternoon and not think about the rest. I can't decide if this kind of compartmentalizing is forgiveness or just willful ignorance. I struggled to reconcile those visits, but I felt like I couldn't stop going. Me showing up each week let these men know that they weren't forgotten, and that alone was huge. But if I'm honest with myself and with you, just as much as I was doing it for them, I was doing it for myself, to seem more interesting at cocktail parties, to shock my parents, to have an adventure and a good story to tell. 15 years later, and I still don't know whether my presence there was more selfless or selfish. But at least along the way, I brought some small bit of happiness to those men and even made some of them feel like warm pea soup and hot buttered rolls. Thank you. Thank you, Andy Wynn. Let's give her a cheer.
And thank you to Mona Malone for submitting this story. That is the most important thing here, along with the readers at Grown Up Storytime. We want to hear your stories. Think of it as a narrative adventure in the human psyche, human experience. Mental Institute, War and Peace Soup. I told you, seen, heard, and understood. Up next for story time, What Happens in Vegas becomes a story for later. Written by Sarah Bella Mental and read by Elizabeth Sosa Bailey.